The forbidden gift. James ran through the thick jungle, his breath heavy, his legs weak. His heart pounded in his chest. Behind him, the sounds of alien creatures roared. Massive, sharp-clawed beasts hunting him. He had no weapons, no food, and no way to call for help. His ship had crashed on this strange planet, and now he was alone, running for his life. His foot caught on a root, and he fell hard onto the damp ground. Pain shot through his body. He groaned and tried to stand, but his limbs felt too heavy. His vision blurred. The air smelled sweet and strange, and his head spun. Then, silence. The creatures that had been chasing him suddenly stopped. James forced his eyes open and saw them standing at the edge of a giant stone temple. The beasts growled low but did not step forward. It was as if an invisible barrier stopped them. James dragged himself toward the temple, his fingers scraping against the rough stone. He had no other choice, either enter or be torn apart. He pulled himself up the steps, one by one, until he collapsed at the top. The last thing he saw before everything went dark was a tall, glowing figure walking toward him. James woke up to the feeling of silk against his skin. He was lying on a soft bed in a massive chamber. Golden light flickered from strange floating orbs above him. The air smelled of rare flowers, sweet and intoxicating. Then he saw her. A tall woman stood in front of him, watching him closely. Her silver skin shimmered in the light. Her long white hair cascaded over her shoulders, and her piercing golden eyes locked onto his. She wore a flowing robe of deep blue, embroidered with golden symbols that pulsed with light. James pushed himself up slowly. His body still ached, but he felt different, stronger. "Where am I?" he asked, his voice dry. The woman tilted her head. "You are in my temple," she said in a smooth, melodic voice. "You stand in the presence of Queen Valera." James's mind raced. A queen, a temple. This place was nothing like the rest of the jungle. I didn't mean to intrude," he said carefully. "My ship crashed. I was being chased." Valera nodded slowly. "Yes. The creatures of the forest do not step beyond the sacred boundary. You are safe here, for now." James swallowed. For now. The queen stepped closer. Her eyes studied him as if she were searching for something. "You should not be here," she said. "But you are." He frowned. "I didn't have a choice." Valera's lips curled into a slight smile. "No, perhaps you did not. And yet, fate has brought you here. That is interesting." James had no idea what she meant, but before he could ask, she lifted her hand. A servant stepped forward, carrying a crystal goblet filled with a thick, glowing liquid. The light from the goblet reflected in Valera's golden eyes. She took the goblet and held it out to James. "Drink," she commanded. James hesitated. "What is it?" "The sacred milk," she said simply. "A gift, or a curse, that depends on you." James's mouth felt dry. His instincts screamed not to trust this, but his body felt weak, and there was something hypnotic about the way the liquid shimmered. He looked up at Valera. "Why?" The queen studied him for a long moment. Then she spoke in a quiet, knowing voice. "Because you are not the first human to set foot in this temple, and you will not be the last." A chill ran through James's body. There had been others before him. "Where are they now?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Valera's eyes darkened. "Gone." James's fingers trembled as he reached for the goblet. He could refuse. He could run. But something deep inside him told him there was no escape. He brought the goblet to his lips and drank. The moment the thick liquid touched his tongue, a burning heat spread through his veins. His vision swam. His body seized. He gasped, gripping his chest as a white-hot fire erupted inside him. He fell to the floor, his body shaking. His skin glowed faintly, the same golden symbols that marked Valera's robe now appearing on his arms. James screamed. Valera watched, her face calm, unreadable. "It has begun," she whispered. Then the world around James shattered into darkness. The awakening. Darkness. It stretched endlessly, swallowing everything. James floated in it, weightless, lost. His body burned from the inside out. His mind tangled in a storm of visions, flashes of alien landscapes, strange symbols glowing in the air, whispers in a language he did not understand. He gasped for breath, but there was no air, no ground, no sky. Then a voice. "Awaken." A pulse of energy slammed into him, and suddenly, light. James's eyes flew open. He sat upright with a sharp gasp, his lungs desperate for air. He was no longer in the dark void, but in a grand chamber, the golden glow of floating orbs casting soft light around him. The air smelled of strange flowers, and the silk sheets beneath him felt impossibly smooth. Then the memories hit him like a hammer. The temple, the queen, the sacred milk. His hands flew to his chest, expecting pain, but there was none. Instead, his skin was different, warmer, alive in a way he could not describe. He looked down and sucked in a breath. Golden symbols now glowed faintly on his arms, the same symbols that had been on Queen Valera's robe. They pulsed, almost like a heartbeat. Panic surged through him. What had she done to him? The sound of soft footsteps made him look up. Queen Valera stood before him, watching with those piercing golden eyes. Her long white hair cascaded over her shoulders, her regal form draped in shimmering robes that seemed to shift between colors. "You survived," she said, tilting her head slightly. "That is unexpected." James's throat was dry, his pulse racing. "What did you do to me?" Valera stepped closer, folding her hands in front of her. "I did nothing. The milk was given to you, and your body chose to accept it." James clenched his fists. "Accept what?" A flicker of amusement crossed her face. "Change." James swung his legs off the bed, standing quickly, too quickly. A rush of dizziness made him stumble, but then something strange happened. His body corrected itself, his balance returning instantly, as if an unseen force steadied him. He froze. That wasn't normal. Valera studied him, eyes gleaming. "You feel it, don't you?" James swallowed hard. He did. His body was stronger, lighter, faster somehow. He flexed his fingers, feeling raw energy under his skin, coiled and waiting. His senses were sharper, his vision clearer. He could hear things he shouldn't. Soft footsteps outside the chamber, the rustle of fabric as Valera shifted her stance, even the faint hum of the floating orbs. "What is happening to me?" he whispered. Valera finally stepped closer, reaching out slowly. Her cool fingers touched his wrist, right over one of the glowing symbols. A strange vibration traveled through him, as if his very blood responded to her touch. "You are awakening," she said. James yanked his arm away. "Awakening into what?" Valera's gaze did not waver. "You are no longer just human." James's heart pounded. He stumbled back, but his body moved with unnatural grace. It scared him. "I never asked for this," he muttered. The Queen's expression remained unreadable. "And yet you drank." James clenched his jaw. He had. But had he really had a choice? What would have happened if he refused? A low rumble shook the temple walls. James stiffened, instincts suddenly sharper than ever. Something was wrong. Valera's eyes flickered toward the chamber entrance. "They are here." James tensed. "Who?" Before she could answer, the massive stone doors slammed open, and two alien warriors strode inside. They were taller than James, their dark blue skin covered in jagged black armor. Their eyes, pitch black and unblinking, locked onto him with eerie focus. One of them held a curved blade, the metal glowing with strange energy. The other carried a long spear that hummed with power. James's body reacted before his mind did. His heartbeat slowed, his breathing steadied. His muscles tensed, but not in fear, in readiness. The first warrior stepped forward. His deep, guttural voice echoed in the chamber. The human must be tested. James felt a shiver crawl up his spine. Valera exhaled softly, as if she had been expecting this. She turned to James. This was inevitable. Your transformation is incomplete. They must see if you are worthy. James didn't like the sound of that. And if I'm not? The warrior with the spear answered, his voice like grinding stone. Then we will kill you. James's hands curled into fists. The golden symbols on his skin flickered, reacting to his emotions. Something inside him growled. No, he wasn't going to let anyone decide his fate. The air in the chamber grew heavy. The warriors raised their weapons. Valera watched, her gaze unreadable. James took a deep breath. For the first time since waking up, he stopped fearing what was happening to him. Instead, he embraced it. And then he moved. The Queen's secret. James didn't think, he just moved. His body reacted before his mind could process what was happening. The alien warrior with the glowing spear lunged forward, aiming to skewer him through the chest. But James twisted, his reflexes impossibly fast, the motion fluid and precise. The spear missed by inches, slamming into the stone floor where he had stood just a second ago. James staggered back, eyes wide. How had he done that? The warrior growled and swung again, but this time, James saw it coming. It was as if time slowed, the movement clear before it even happened. His muscles responded instantly, and he ducked under the next strike with ease. He shouldn't have been able to move like this. The other warrior stepped in, his curved blade slicing toward James's neck. James lifted his arm on instinct, and something impossible happened. The golden symbols on his skin flared with light, and the blade bounced off as if he were made of steel. The warriors froze. James looked down at his arm, his breath catching. His skin had just stopped a weapon. "What the hell?" he whispered. The warrior with the spear took a cautious step back, his black eyes narrowing. The one with the blade turned to Queen Valera. "He is not ready." Valera remained still, her golden eyes locked on James. Then, slowly, she smiled. "Oh, he is ready. More than you realize." James clenched his fists, his body still thrumming with energy. "What is happening to me?" he demanded. The warriors looked at each other, then turned and left without another word. The doors shut behind them with a heavy boom. Silence filled the chamber. James turned to Valera, frustration bubbling inside him. "Enough secrets. Enough games. I want answers." The Queen's expression didn't change. "You are not ready for all the answers." James scowled. "Then give me what I am ready for." Valera studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Follow me." She led him through the temple, down a long corridor lined with towering murals. The images were ancient, the paint cracked but still vibrant. James walked past depictions of great battles, alien rulers, and he stopped suddenly. Humans. There on the walls were figures that looked exactly like him. Earth-born humans, wearing armor, standing beside the alien warriors. Some were wielding weapons that pulsed with light. Others had the same glowing symbols on their skin that now marked James's own body. His heart pounded. He turned to Valera. "What is this?" She stopped before a massive golden door, resting her palm against it. The symbols on her robes flickered in response. "The truth." The doors rumbled and slowly creaked open. A rush of warm air met James's face as they stepped inside. His breath caught in his throat. The chamber was massive, stretching far beyond what should have been possible inside the temple. Glowing blue crystals lined the walls, casting shimmering light over ancient sarcophagi. Rows upon rows of stone tombs, each marked with golden symbols. The air smelled of dust and age, yet the energy in the room was alive. James swallowed. "What is this place?" Valara walked toward the nearest tomb, her fingers tracing the smooth stone. This is where the first ones rest, the humans who came before you. James's body tensed. You said I wasn't the first. Valara nodded. Long ago, your kind arrived on this world, just as you did. They drank the sacred milk, and they changed. James's hands curled into fists. Then where are they now? Valara's golden eyes flickered with something distant. Some ascended. James frowned. And the others? Valara's gaze darkened. Some were not strong enough. The power consumed them. James's stomach twisted. He turned back to the murals, staring at the humans with glowing symbols on their bodies. Some of them looked inhuman, their eyes too bright, their features altered. He turned back to Valara. What am I becoming? She stepped closer, her voice soft but firm. Something more. James exhaled sharply. He didn't want riddles. He wanted answers. Did they survive? He pressed. The ones who drank the milk. Valara hesitated. Then she gestured toward the far end of the chamber. James followed her gaze, and his blood ran cold. At the farthest wall, the murals changed. No longer depicting great warriors, they showed something terrifying. Beasts. Horrific, monstrous creatures with glowing eyes and twisted, corrupted forms. And in their midst, the same golden symbols that were on James's skin. His throat went dry. No, he whispered. Valara's voice was quiet. Some became warriors, some became rulers, but others became lost. Their minds shattered, their bodies transformed. James shook his head. That's not going to happen to me. Valara's gaze didn't waver. No, it will not, because I will not allow it. James's pulse was racing. Why me? Valara finally looked away, her fingers brushing the cold stone of one of the sarcophagi. Because your arrival was foretold. James took a step back. Foretold. Valara nodded. A prophecy. That one day, a human would come who could wield the power without losing himself. One who could restore balance to the chaos left behind. James ran a hand through his hair. This was too much. He had crashed on a random planet. This wasn't fate. It was a mistake. And yet, his body told him something different. The power he felt was real. The changes were happening, whether he wanted them or not. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. What happens now? Valara turned to him. Now, she said, you choose. James frowned. Choose what? Valara gestured to the murals. You can embrace what you are becoming. Learn to control it. To wield it. She paused, her expression unreadable. Or you can try to run from it. But know this, James. The power will not stop changing you. It will only decide its own path. A cold shiver ran down James's spine. For the first time since waking up in this temple, he realized something terrifying. He might not be in control of what he was becoming. And the thought chilled him to his core. The hunter's challenge. James stood frozen, his mind tangled in a storm of thoughts. The murals on the walls loomed over him, ancient and unchanging, their golden figures whispering a story of power, transformation, and destruction. He was staring at the twisted forms, the humans who had failed, who had become something else. Some had ascended. Some had become monsters. And now he was on that same path. He turned to Queen Valara, his heart pounding. How do I stop it? She watched him carefully, her golden eyes reflecting the flickering glow of the chamber. You do not stop it, James. You control it. James clenched his fists, frustration boiling inside him. And if I can't? Valara's gaze didn't waver. Then you will not be the first to fall. A chill ran through him. But before he could say another word, the ground shook. The temple trembled, dust raining down from the high ceilings. A distant roar echoed through the air, deep and primal. James's instincts flared, his skin tingling with an unknown energy. Something was coming. Valara turned toward the exit, They have arrived. James stepped forward, his body tense. Who? The queen didn't answer. She simply walked toward the temple doors, her long robes flowing behind her. The symbols on her sleeves pulsed with light, as if responding to something unseen. James hesitated for only a moment before following. They stepped into the grand courtyard outside the temple, where alien warriors in golden armor stood in formation, their weapons gleaming under the twin suns. At the center of the open space, a massive figure awaited them. James's breath caught in his throat. The creature was at least 9 feet tall, its dark blue skin streaked with glowing red veins. Its body was covered in thick, jagged armor, and its 4 arms flexed with raw strength. But the most terrifying part was its face, human-like, yet wrong. The eyes were too large, the mouth too wide, and the golden symbols that marked its skin looked cracked and broken. James realized, with a sick feeling in his gut, that he was looking at one of the failed ones, a human who had once stood where he was standing now, and lost. The creature's deep, distorted voice rumbled through the courtyard. Another has taken the milk. James swallowed hard. The warriors around him shifted, gripping their weapons, but they did not attack. This was not an invasion. This was a test. Valara stepped forward, her expression calm. He is stronger than the ones before. The creature's blackened eyes locked onto James. It grinned. Then let him prove it. The words were barely spoken before the massive creature charged. James had no time to think. One moment, the monster was standing still. Then the next, it was on him, moving faster than something that size had any right to. A fist the size of James's chest swung toward him, glowing with a dark red energy. James's body reacted. His golden symbols flared, and his movements became instinctive. He ducked, feeling the fist graze past his face, so close that the heat of it burned his skin. The air boomed from the force of the strike. James twisted, planting his foot and countering. His fist lashed out and connected. A shockwave erupted as his knuckles slammed into the creature's armored chest. A normal human's punch would have been meaningless, but James was no longer normal. The impact sent the creature skidding back several feet, leaving deep grooves in the stone ground. The warriors around them murmured in surprise. The creature's grin widened. Good. It moved again, even faster this time. James barely had time to react before a second fist smashed into his ribs. Pain exploded through his body as he was lifted off the ground and sent flying across the courtyard. His back hit a stone pillar, shattering the ancient carvings on impact. Dust and debris rained around him. James groaned, pushing himself up. The pain was there, but it was distant, fading too fast. His body was healing itself. The creature stalked toward him. "Do you feel it yet?" It growled. The hunger. James breathed heavily. He did feel something. Not pain. Not fear. Something deeper. A fire inside him, coiled and waiting. The creature lunged again. But this time, James didn't move away. He stepped into it. His hand shot forward, catching the creature's fist in his bare palm. The ground beneath them cracked from the force. The warriors gasped. Even Valera's expression flickered with something close to satisfaction. James tightened his grip, his own golden symbols flaring brighter. Energy surged through him, raw, powerful, uncontrollable. For the first time, the creature hesitated. James's voice was different when he spoke. "Your mistake," he growled, "was thinking I'm like the others." Then he twisted, and with inhuman strength, he hurled the creature across the courtyard. The massive warrior smashed into the temple wall, cracking the stone. Silence. Dust settled. The creature did not rise. The warriors around them stood still, staring. Then, slowly, one of them knelt. Then another, and another, until the entire courtyard bowed before him. James stood there, his chest rising and falling, golden light still pulsing from his skin. His heart pounded, but not from exhaustion. from something else, something awakening. Valara approached him, her gaze unreadable. "You are no longer just a man, James," she murmured. James swallowed, still staring at his own glowing hands. "Then what am I?" Valara tilted her head slightly. "We shall see." The trial of beasts. The temple courtyard was silent. The alien warriors remained kneeling, their heads bowed in submission. The broken body of the monstrous former human lay against the shattered temple wall, unmoving. The golden symbols on James's skin still glowed, pulsing in rhythm with his heart. James should have felt relief. He had won. He had survived. Instead, he felt something else. Something stirred inside him, something deep and primal. His body still thrummed with the energy from the fight. His senses were sharper than ever. He could hear the softest breaths of the warriors around him, feel the heat of their bodies, smell the dust settling in the air. And worse, he wanted more. The realization sent a cold shiver through him. This wasn't normal. It wasn't human. Queen Valara stepped forward, her golden eyes locked onto him. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something in her gaze, something knowing. "You feel it now," she said softly. James clenched his fists, forcing himself to steady his breathing. "What is happening to me?" Valara tilted her head slightly, as if studying him. "You are changing. The power inside you, it is testing you, seeing if you are worthy." James frowned. "And if I'm not?" Valara smiled faintly. "Then you will become like him." She gestured toward the fallen warrior, the one who had once been human but had transformed into something twisted. James's stomach twisted. "That's not going to happen." Valara's golden eyes glowed. "Then prove it." She turned and gestured to the temple doors. Slowly they creaked open, revealing a vast chamber beyond. The air that drifted out was heavy, charged with something ancient. James hesitated. Valara glanced at him. "This is the rite of ascension. Every warrior who has taken the sacred milk must pass through it. If you succeed, you will become something more." James's jaw tightened. "And if I fail?" Valara's expression darkened. "Then you will cease to be James." A chill ran through him. But he had come too far to turn back now. Without another word, he stepped inside. The chamber of beasts. The doors slammed shut behind him, sealing him in darkness. For a moment, there was nothing. No sound, no movement, just the quiet hum of his own heartbeat. Then, a low growl echoed through the chamber. James stiffened. His golden symbols flared, illuminating the room in a faint glow. He caught glimpses of stone walls lined with ancient carvings, depictions of battles, of warriors fighting against creatures that barely looked real. Except they were. Another growl. Closer this time. James turned sharply, his instincts screaming. His vision sharpened, and for the first time, he saw them. Eyes. Dozens of them. Glowing in the dark. Then the beasts moved. A blur of motion. Something lunged at him from the shadows, a massive shape with jagged teeth and twisted limbs. James barely had time to react before it was on him, claws swiping for his throat. His body moved on its own. He ducked, spun, and slammed his fist into the creature's ribs. A shockwave of golden light erupted on impact, sending the beast flying backward into the wall. James exhaled sharply. More shapes emerged from the darkness. At least 6 of them. Some crawled on the walls, their elongated limbs stretching unnaturally. Others stalked forward on all fours, their eyes locked onto him with pure hunger. James felt it again, that deep primal instinct rising in him. For the first time, he didn't fight it. He embraced it. The creatures attacked all at once. James moved. One lunged. He sidestepped and snapped its neck in a single strike. Another pounced from the side, claws flashing. He grabbed its arm and ripped it free. His body felt unstoppable, his strength limitless. Every movement was precise, controlled, devastating. The last creature hesitated. It stared at him, its glowing eyes wide, as if afraid. James stepped forward. His golden symbols burned brighter, casting long shadows against the chamber walls. The beast let out a whimper, then fled into the darkness. James stood there, breathing heavily. The trial was over, and he had won. The final choice. The temple doors creaked open, revealing Queen Valera standing outside. She smiled. "You are not like the others." James stepped into the light, his body still thrumming with power. The golden symbols on his skin no longer flickered. They shined, bright and strong. Something inside him had changed. He was no longer just human. Valera stepped closer, tilting her head. "Now, you must choose." James frowned. "Choose what?" Valera's expression remained unreadable. "The power inside you is awake now. You can control it, shape it. But once you do, you will never be the same." James swallowed hard. "And if I refuse?" Valera's gaze darkened. "Then it will consume you." James exhaled slowly. His hands curled into fists. He had spent his whole life believing in control and logic. But now there was something else inside him. Something ancient, something waiting. He looked at Valera. "I choose to control it." Valera smiled. "Then your true journey begins." James took a deep breath. He didn't know what was coming next, but he would not fall. He would not become a monster. He would become something else, something more. The truth of the sacred milk. The temple's great halls stretched before James, their golden walls whispering silent stories of long-forgotten warriors. He had changed. He could feel it in every breath, in every heartbeat that pulsed with an unnatural rhythm. The power inside him was no longer foreign. It was part of him now, a force that hummed through his veins like liquid fire. But he was not alone. Queen Valera walked beside him, her presence steady, watching him with those piercing golden eyes that seemed to see through him. The warriors in golden armor bowed as they passed, acknowledging him in a way that unsettled him. James wasn't sure who he was anymore. Was he still just a man, or was he something else? Finally, Valera stopped before a massive stone door, its surface marked with the same glowing symbols that now pulsed across James's skin. He could feel the energy radiating from it, vibrating against his bones like a silent voice calling him forward. Valera turned to him. "It is time," she said. James's fingers curled into fists. Time for what? Valera studied him for a long moment. Then, with slow precision, she pressed her palm against the door. The golden symbols flared to life, and with a deep, grinding sound, the doors opened. Beyond them lay a chamber unlike any other James had seen. It was vast, stretching beyond sight, its ceiling lost in an endless darkness. The walls glowed with pulsating golden veins, like the living heart of the temple itself, and at the center of the chamber stood a massive stone pedestal. Upon it, a single ornate chalice, filled with a luminous, swirling liquid. James's breath caught. He knew that liquid. The sacred milk. But this was different. Purer, stronger. The light that radiated from it was alive, shifting and pulsing like a breathing thing. James swallowed hard. "What is this?" Valera stepped forward, her robes flowing like liquid silk. "This," she said, "is the source of all transformations. The first and most powerful gift ever granted to our kind, and to yours." James frowned. "You said humans had been here before, that they drank the milk, but you never said why." Valera turned to him, her golden eyes flickering. "Because it is not just a gift, James. It is a catalyst, a force that chooses those worthy of its power." James stared at the swirling liquid. He could feel it calling to him, like a silent whisper in the back of his mind. Then he turned to her. "What does it do?" Valera's voice was quiet. "It reveals the truth." James's pulse quickened. "The truth about what?" Valera held his gaze. "About who you really are. The forgotten history." James exhaled slowly. He didn't like riddles. He had come too far, fought too hard for half-truths. "Then tell me," he said. "No more games. No more tests. What am I?" Valera walked past him, stopping before the pedestal. She ran her fingers over the stone, her eyes distant, as if looking into something far beyond the chamber. "Long ago, before our time, before even the first of your kind walked upon earth, there were those who ruled the stars," she said softly. James frowned. "Who?" Valera turned back to him. "They were called the Elders, beings of immense power, beyond gods, beyond mortals. They shaped worlds, created life, and stood as the guardians of balance." James crossed his arms. "And let me guess, they disappeared." Valera nodded. "Vanished. No one knows why. But before they left, they created the sacred milk, the essence of their own power, left behind to guide those who would come after." James's breath caught. "Wait, you're saying this stuff isn't just some alien mutation?" He gestured toward his glowing arms. "It's ancient." Valera nodded. "More than ancient. It is the last trace of the Elder's will." James took a step back, his mind racing. If what she was saying was true, then the power inside him wasn't just some random effect of drinking the milk. It was something more, something planned. And suddenly, he wasn't sure he wanted it anymore. A dangerous choice. James turned back to the glowing chalice. "So what happens if I drink this?" Valera's voice was calm, but heavy with meaning. "You will become the first in centuries to receive the full power of the Elders." James exhaled sharply. "And if I don't?" Valera's expression darkened. "Then the power inside you will remain incomplete, unstable. You will forever be caught between what you were and what you are becoming." James's stomach tightened. "And what if I drink it and it?" He gestured toward the fallen warrior from before. "Turns me into that." Valera's gaze was unwavering. "Then you will have failed." James gritted his teeth. There it was. The risk. The power inside him had already made him stronger, faster. It had given him senses beyond human, strength beyond anything he had ever known. But it had also brought hunger, an instinct he barely understood. If he wasn't careful, he could end up like the ones before him. Twisted, lost, consumed by the power. And yet, he could feel the pull. The chalice called to him, its swirling light reaching toward him like invisible fingers. His heartbeat slowed, his vision sharpened. It was waiting. For him. James took a deep breath. And then, he reached out. The moment his fingers touched the chalice, a shockwave of golden energy exploded through the chamber. The walls shook, the glowing veins pulsing like a living heartbeat. James's mind tore open. Visions rushed into him. Flashes of ancient battles, worlds collapsing, gods screaming in fury. And then, he saw them. The Elders, towering figures of golden light, their faces shifting between forms, their voices like distant thunder. They stood before him, watching, waiting. And then one of them spoke. "You are the last of us." James's heart nearly stopped. He staggered back, his breath ragged. His skin burned as the symbols on his arms flared brighter than ever. His very soul felt like it was being reshaped. The truth hit him like a crashing wave. He hadn't just been changed by the sacred milk. He had been chosen, and the fate of what came next was now his to decide. The final choice. The golden light surged around James, pulling him into a place beyond time. His body felt weightless, yet heavy. His mind stretched in all directions, as if it was being rewritten by something far older than he could comprehend. The vision of the Elders burned into his mind. They stood before him, towering beings of pure energy, shifting, formless, their eyes endless voids of knowledge. "You are the last of us." The words echoed through his very bones, sinking into the deepest parts of his soul. James gritted his teeth, his body trembling as the energy inside him surged violently. He could feel his veins igniting, his very cells restructuring under the weight of something impossibly vast. He wasn't just changing. He was becoming something else entirely. The elders' voices rippled through him like 1,000 distant stars whispering at once. "Will you ascend, or will you fall?" James screamed as the golden energy erupted inside him, consuming his senses. His past, his memories, his very identity felt like it was being peeled away, layer by layer, replaced with something new. And then, darkness. The awakening. James's eyes snapped open, and he gasped, sucking in a sharp breath. He was back in the temple chamber. The golden chalice was still in his trembling hands, the last drops of the sacred milk glowing faintly. His body felt like it had been reborn. Every inch of him vibrated with raw, untamed power. But something was wrong. The room was silent. Too silent. He turned. Queen Valera stood there, but something had changed. She was staring at him, not with admiration or approval, but with something James had never seen in her golden eyes before. Fear. James pushed himself up slowly, unsteady on his feet. The stone beneath him cracked under his weight. He blinked. Had he just? He was heavier now, or stronger. The very air around him felt different. Valera. His voice sounded deeper, like it carried an echo beneath it. She did not move. Her hands were clenched at her sides, her breathing slow and controlled. But James could see it. She was afraid of him. Finally, she spoke. "What are you?" James took a step forward, and the symbols on his skin flared with blinding intensity. The golden light flooded the chamber, and for a single moment, James saw everything. The energy that wove through the temple, the warriors outside, the distant mountains, the stars themselves beyond the planet's sky. It was too much. His mind reeled, and he fell to one knee, gripping his head. His body felt like it was breaking apart and reassembling at the same time. Valera finally moved, stepping closer. Her expression was still guarded. "James," she said carefully, "you need to control it." James let out a ragged breath. I don't know how." The queen knelt beside him, placing her hand over his. For a moment, the golden glow calmed, the storm of energy inside him settling into a low hum. "You are the first to survive this transformation," she said softly. "But survival does not mean control. You must learn balance." James swallowed hard. "And if I can't?" Valera's expression darkened. "Then you will burn." A cold shiver ran through him. He had been given something no one had ever survived before. He was stronger, faster, more aware than he had ever been. But if he couldn't contain it, if he couldn't find the balance between what he was and what he had become, he would be consumed. The arrival. Before he could respond, the temple shook. A deep, thunderous sound rolled through the air, followed by a violent pulse of energy. James and Valera both turned sharply as the sky above them split open. A massive dark ship emerged from the void, its surface shifting like liquid shadow. It was unlike anything James had seen before, not the sleek crafts of the warriors, nor the ancient designs of the temple. This was something else, something hungry. Valera's face tightened. "They have come." James's pulse quickened. "Who?" The queen turned to him, her golden eyes burning. "The ones who tried to steal the elders' power before." A dark hum filled the air, a resonance that James could feel deep in his bones. The symbols on his skin reacted, pulsing in response to whatever was coming. "They can sense you," Valera said grimly. "They know what you are now." James's hands curled into fists. His heart was steady, but he felt it again. That same deep hunger from before, the raw power waiting beneath his skin. The sky rippled, and from the massive ship, figures began descending, floating, shapeless, moving like liquid shadows against the light of the twin suns. And then one of them spoke. Not with words, but inside James's mind. "We have found you at last." The voice was cold, ancient, filled with something beyond malice, beyond hate. James gritted his teeth. He didn't know who these beings were. He didn't know why they wanted him. But he could feel it. They were not meant to have this power, and he was not going to let them take it. Valera placed a hand on his arm. "Do you understand now?" James took a deep breath, his golden symbols flaring brighter. He did. This power wasn't just about him. It wasn't just about transformation. It was about protecting what the elders had left behind. He was the last of them, and he would not fall. The dark figures descended, their forms shifting as they prepared to strike. The warriors of the temple drew their weapons, readying for battle. But James stepped forward. His golden light burned against the darkness, and the air trembled around him. He had spent his whole life wondering who he was meant to be. Now he knew. He was the last guardian of the elders, and he was ready to fight.